How's it going, you wonderful people? It's Jay, and in today's video let's talk about Game Boy games that we would love to see on Switch. Let's do it. I absolutely adore the Game Boy, whether it's the OG Game Boy, the Game Boy Color, or Game Boy Advance. So many incredible memories, so many incredible adventures poured into tiny little cartridges. Nintendo and other developers put so much love and skill into creating some of the best games ever. And what better way to preserve these games than have them on the Nintendo Switch? So in today's video we're going to look at some of these classic Game Boy games that really deserve a Switch port. We've gotten a lot of Kirby goodness this year. The Pink Powerhouse has had a gorgeous Switch release in Forgotten Lands and a fun little multiplayer brawler in Dream Buffet. Having the original games on Switch could unlock something a little special for Kirby fans. Enter Kirby's Dream Land, the very first game that made its debut on the Game Boy 20 years ago. It featured a little ghost-like floating blob that gobbled up enemies and was the only game where Kirby couldn't take on copy abilities. A super fun, charming little platformer. It'd be incredible to revisit Kirby's debut on Switch. One of my all-time favourites on the Game Boy, it had to be Bomberman Pocket. Much like the other Bomberman games, you play as the explosive little guy who spawns bombs to break through obstacles and beat down baddies in his path. The difference comes in the perspective. Instead of trotting around the grid from above, Bomberman Pocket is a sweet little side-scrolling platformer, perfect for that Game Boy screen. Throw in classic boss battles and familiar power-ups and it is an instant classic, perfect for Game Boy games on Switch. You can't launch Game Boy games on Switch without including a throwback to one of the most iconic arcade hits, Donkey Kong. The very first game that gave Nintendo a huge platform in the US back in the early days. The Game Boy version Donkey Kong 94 is an expanded take on the arcade hit, featuring 97 additional stages, charming retro graphics and very solid gameplay that made Donkey Kong so successful. This 90s hit was re-released on the 3DS Virtual Console, so it could be a likely contender for Game Boy games on Switch. Another game that was re-released on the 3DS needs to be part of the lineup. Pokémon trading card game is one of the rarer gems that came out fairly late in the Game Boy's life, where you play out trading card battles on the small screen. It may sound a bit strange, given that you could use your actual cards to fend off your foes, but having virtual decks on the Game Boy was incredibly fun. A little RPG of its own merit, it would be great to have this back on Switch with online play and possibly trading as well. Speaking of Pokemon, it wouldn't be a list of Game Boy games on Switch without mentioning where the series began in 1996. Kanto? Again? You may ask. Yes, please. Whilst it's not too hard to dip back into the Gen 1 lore these days with re-releases and fan merch like our own tees, being able to play the original again on Switch would be a joy. Online battles, trades, or even connectivity to Pokemon Home would be a neat little touch as well. Would love to see Gold and Silver also make an appearance, given a remake seems ever unlikely. Who could say no to a little bit of Mario? The Game Boy game may have had a teeny tiny screen, but it was a powerhouse when it came to developers making the most out of the hardware. That full Mario experience wherever you go, on the toilet, it was possible and it really helped propel the Game Boy to the massive success alongside Tetris. The Mario games were a thing of their own on the Game Boy, unique power-ups, worlds, incredible music, it was just great fun. All these platforming gems need to be brought back on Switch. Mario games are fun, challenging and super easy to pick up and play, but what about that flatulent treasure hunter Wario? The anti-hero with the finest moustache had the unique set of games on Game Boy. It would be great to see these lost gems back on Switch. At first glance it looks like a standard platformer with Wario blobbing about instead of Mario. The difference comes in how Wario moves. He's tough, he's surprisingly nimble and bashes his way throughout the stages. There's also a fair few puzzles too, making for interesting backtracking and a totally different vibe from our regular trip to the Mushroom Kingdom. Game Boy definitely had its fair share of platformers from Mario to Donkey Kong, but what about those Disney hits that were so successful on home consoles like the NES and SNES? One port that is a fan favourite has to be the adorable little Game Boy version of Ducktales. Woo! Platforming precisions, charming music, and tricky stages, all in your pocket. Play as Scrooge McDuck as he travels around the world to seek out treasure. This fan favourite deserves to be preserved by having Game Boy games on Switch. One Game Boy game that needs to touch down on Switch has to be Metroid II. This classic saw our famous bounty hunter explore caves and caverns in a technical masterpiece for its time. A mysterious story, challenging bosses and upgrades made it one of the most intriguing games for Nintendo's handheld back in 1991. It did have a 3DS remake back in 2017, but it would be great to experience that black and white original to see where this chapter of the Metroid story took place. For years and years now, Zelda fans have been hoping to see Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons bloom once again on a Nintendo console. A remake using the Link's Awakening engine would make so much sense on Switch, but ports of the original Game Boy Color versions would be the next best thing. A pair of companion adventures which saw Link explore time and seasons to return those worlds back to normal. A fan favourite set of games that really need to be re-released on Switch. The last set of games that we need to see back on Switch has to be the iconic Donkey Kong Land series. They were some of the meatiest, most incredibly detailed games on the handheld, really pushing the Game Boy to its utmost limits. Challenging platforming, a ton of collectibles and great music made these rare classics some of the best ever Game Boy game releases. Having these again on Switch would be a great piece of 90s history. So what did you think of our selection of classic Game Boy games that need Switch treatment? Let us know your favourite Game Boy games in the comment below. If you love Nintendo, if you love retro games, be sure to join the conversation on our Discord. If you like this video, you may want to hit the like button. If you want to see more videos like this, more Nintendo, more geeky, more gaming videos, you may want to subscribe. And before you move on to the next video, be sure to check out our exclusive merch, Geeky and Gaming Designs voted for by you. Links are in the description below. And there we go, classic Game Boy games that need to be on Switch. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video. Bye!
You were close.